Hello and welcome or welcome back to Read Becca. It is the time where we look back on our past year that is gone and reflect. We look at how we did in our reading, how we feel about that, things we liked and didn't like, what we did in our goals, and that is what I'm gonna try to accomplish here. I'm not a stats nerd at all. I like seeing everybody's lovely layouts and charts, but this is kind of gonna be just me throwing a lot of numbers at you because I'm not the stats design person at all. So I will try my best. But this is going to be very casual. Even if it's not helpful for you, I do find this helpful for myself every year to compile all this information and look back on it and think about what I want for the future. And I have already set out my goals for 2024 based on a lot of things that I learned over the course of the year of 2023. So I'll be discussing a little bit about that, those things I learned, and hopefully I will be taking things away from this process. So first off, talking about book counts, I don't set a hard book count goal. That has been useful to me in the past years. If you're new here, I've talked about this quite a few times before, but I really fell out of reading for about a decade in my life. So I completely understand for the people who need a book count goal to keep them driven and going, because that was how I reprogrammed myself to get back into reading again. And my numbers were nowhere near what they are now. My numbers are quite big now, so I don't have a concern about book count goals. So don't take this large number that I'm going to throw out as, me bragging. That's where I'm at naturally. I don't push myself, and I read a very large amount because I have put forth a lot of effort several years ago to rebuild habits in my life that now make it natural for me to read a lot. So the beginning first number is I read or DNF'd a total of 169 books and about 54 short stories, possibly a few I didn't keep track of. So that's a very large number. I also had really great, I would say, ratings overall. I think 2023 has been probably one of my best reading years ever in my life. Out of those, I DNF'd 5. So speaking purely about the 169 novels, I DNF'd 5 novels. I 2-starred 4 novels. So 9 out of 69 were complete disappointments, really, I would say. So 161 things were 3 stars or above. So that to me is a very stellar reading year. I have no complaints about that. As far as the length, I already mentioned, I did read 54 short stories that I kept track of. So I do like reading short fiction. That significantly fell off in the back half of the year. So I'm trying to build that back up at the beginning of this year and hope it doesn't fall off. So I need to build short fiction, specifically outside of collections is what I'm going for there, into my reading life and tracking. And I need to put more of an effort into that, I think, this year. The other thing is the length of longer works. And my longest work was over 900 pages. And I read 16 tomes this year in 2023. That is my highest number ever. And a tome is a book over 500 pages, as it's generally accepted on BookTube. So that is a great number. I'm really happy with that. I did have a tome count goal a couple of years ago, and I feel like I needed it at the time, and now I'm not having a problem with picking up those really long books. They are naturally occurring in my reading diet, so I'm very, very happy with that. That was why I removed the goal last year, but I do think this is something I want to keep, to continue tracking with my reading. To see if it does start falling off, I want to put more effort back into it. But as of right now, I'm super happy with the variety of things that I am reading in terms of length. So I also didn't specifically track when, in terms of publication dates, releases were from that I was reading as a broad swath, but I did track new releases to some degree. So I am very happy with my new release reading, actually, and I'm a little surprised with that. Going into the year, at the end of 2022, actually, I started tracking a list of specific titles that had been released in 2022 that I had not gotten to yet. And I kind of, hard froze that list once 2023 started and kept that same list unchanged through the entire year of 2023 and only kept track of things as I read them. I do really terribly when I set myself very specific title goals to read a list of books, to read a list of series, anything like that. So this was not quite that. This was just things I wanted to keep on my radar. I didn't want to lose track of that these were top of the list. And I feel like I did really well at that list, actually, without actively putting forth a ton of effort to do that. I somehow wound up with a really nice round number of 30 titles, and I read 19 of them as of the end of the year. So I do still want to get to the other remaining titles that I haven't. And I have also started a similar list, or actually I've already locked down that list at this point, of 2023 titles now that I froze at the start of the year. So now I'm looking at both 2022 titles I still have remaining. That's a rather short list. And I have a much shorter list overall of 17 titles from 2023 that I haven't read yet. So those are my kind of new release goals. For 2023, I don't know if the list is shorter because there were fewer books I was interested in, or more likely, my feeling, my gut vibe on this is that I actually did a much, much better job in 2023 of immediately reaching out for and grabbing books from authors that I love, that had new releases coming out, or sequels in series that I was reading. I feel like I did really well at grabbing those books right away, instead of just going, oh, well, I already know I love that thing, so it can wait for whenever I get to it, which is what I usually do. And that's the bad habit I've been trying to break with my goals a lot, because I very often will, love an author and never get to their backlist. I really need to do that. I will love a series and only read the first book and never continue on. It's a difficulty. Well, we have all those weird mental quirks as readers, and I'm trying very hard through my goals to correct that and get to the things that I love. So I think that's it for all the preamble and random stuff. So let's get into my goals from last year. So my first one was very counterintuitive. It was to buy more books, and I did not set a specific number on that. That was not, I didn't write down anything specific to that, but in my mind, the idea surrounding this one was to focus more on indie books and buying special books that I really, really loved and had already read. Because I very frequently do read a book from the library and then purchase a physical copy of a book I've loved. However, my methodology previously has been just wait till I find it secondhand. And I miss out on books I have really loved because of that. And I have a very laissez-faire attitude about that. But I would like to have the books I love on my shelf so I can reread them when I want, and I could always get them from the library again, but I just find physical books to be a joyful object to surround myself with. So I'm trying to do that more, where books I do find really special, I'm collecting from the authors that are meaningful for me. So what I did this year, or over the past year, was I did a subscription to Coffee House Press for 2 of their seasons. And I haven't even bothered to write down how many books that was. I have not tracked exactly the number of total books I bought, but I did do that. I also bought 4 books from Stellaform Press that I just hauled recently. So those were my indie press books. I also shifted things with how I was doing anticipated releases. So I had tried doing anticipated releases and I didn't really like doing those types of videos. Instead, with that increased buying goal, I moved to just buying ebooks of self-published works that I was really excited about and showing those in a haul, because that way I was kind of getting almost the same thing I would in an anticipated releases, but putting it on my own shelf so that I could go get to it. Rather than with anticipated releases, I was not buying those books and I was forgetting about them a lot of the time. So I think I really helped myself out with that. And I feel I did very good at this goal. I didn't track overall total bought numbers over the year, as I mentioned, but I did, in fact, buy and read 14 things. And I'm really happy with that number. I think that's a great number. I did read 14 self-published works, and I feel like this goal and having, just bought those self-pubs helped keep that excitement there and get me to picking those up. And I got a mix of brand new books. I got a copy of Babel from the UK that I definitely wouldn't have bought for myself without this goal. I got Mountain of the Sea. I got Starling House recently. So I got a bunch of nice hardback copies of recent releases that I read and loved because I was keeping myself on top of that and having it in mind that I gave myself the permission to do so. So that's not something I would have done before. This is going to be a lot of me saying, I totally failed this goal, but I actually feel okay about it. My second goal was finishing 12 series. And I, in reality, finished 6 series. So that's another failure. However, I actually feel very good about this goal. I'm not complaining about the goal at all. I think I got to the midpoint of the year and realized that I only had finished 2 series at that point. And in my mind, I had been doing very well at the goal. I was feeling excited about series. I felt like I was reading a lot of sequels. So I dug in and started looking at why is my perception of where I'm at and my excitement level for series not lining up with the numbers here. So midway through the year, I kind of mentally changed this goal for myself, because what I realized was I was reading series and I was doing really well, but several of them, I was actually catching them up to current. So that is why on my 2024 goals, I have officially changed this to either finish or current, because the intent of the goal, the spirit of the goal, was to clear the decks of backlogged things that are already available in series I was enjoying. And so catching a series up to current is doing that. It has the same purpose. So internally, I'm fine with this, but as far as the technicalities, I totally failed this goal. I did read a total of 30 sequels in 2023. That's phenomenal. I may have only finished 6 series, but I caught an additional 10 series beyond that up to current. So I have 16 series at this point that have no pending sequels for me to read after all of my progress. So that sounds like it should be a success, even though I failed the goal technically. So I'm actually quite happy with that. I'm not going to complain. My next 2 goals kind of go together. Goal 3 was reading from my TBR shelf for the year. I've done a recent tour of my 2024 TBR shelf, and my goal was simply to read 1 more book than the prior year, and that was 21 books off of my current year TBR shelf. That's not all of my physically owned unread books at all. It's a narrowed down focus, and that's what most of my goals rely on. I did not succeed at this goal either. I read 16 works from my physical TBR shelf. And again, this is another one I failed, but I feel successful at. Should I have been able to read 21 books from that shelf? Yes, so that should have been no problem. So it is a failure in that aspect. But in terms of the spirit of the goal of reading more than the previous year, I totally accomplished that. So my previous year, in 2022, I ended my TBR shelf. It's 4 small shelves, really. I finished off about 3/4 of a shelf and cleared that to replace books on it. In 2023, I completed an entire shelf worth of books. 4 of the books that I read out of the 16 were tomes. So I read 4 books over 500 pages, which means I read a lot more volume of book, even if the book count was lower. And I generally am someone who doesn't really care for the page count tracking. I think it all evens out, really. But in this case, it's meaningful to me that I did finish a larger quantity in terms of the volume that I read from my TBR shelf. So I'm kind of giving myself a mental pass on that. But again, I did fail, and I need to focus more energy this year toward reading from my TBR shelf. And we will get back to that after the next one. So the next goal was my owned ebooks. And I had set out a goal of 24. And as I mentioned earlier with the buying books, I did include those, any new bought books, because I owned them, obviously, even if I bought them in 2023. I set out that goal, and I did not get anywhere close. I only read 14 ebooks. So that is a massive failure. And this is probably the only one I actually feel like I definitely should be reading more ebooks. I have so many ebooks. I have hundreds of ebooks, and I need to be getting to those, but it's so easy to just forget about your Kindle, you know? So that needs to be a priority as well. So what that means is these 2 combined, I recognize that as a problem of me getting to my own works. And that's where in my 2024 goals, my really big goal for the year, I adapted that into reading the first 24 books of the year from my own shelves, whether that be in print or in ebook. And what that has meant is really streamlining what the spirit of the goals were. So instead of having to focus on ebooks or my physical TBR shelf, just simply streamlining it down to I'm going to read books I already own at the start of the year is going to jumpstart all of these other things that I had set out multiple goals over the past few years trying to target. So if I can actually stick to reading 24 books at the beginning of the year from my own shelves, whether that's in print or ebook, I'm going to jumpstart everything. And I think that's the great way to approach it for me and is going to be really effective. So I'm quite hopeful for improvement in this area. And I think the ebooks is probably the one thing that I am actually disappointed about, because I have so many, especially self-published works that aren't available otherwise, that I have wanted to get to and I'm excited about, and I just forget about them. So that needs to be a priority. And I'm hoping that my goals in 2024 do address that. So I did, out of interest, keep track of every book I ever had on a monthly TBR. So those are not specifically from my year-long TBR. These are books that went on the month's TBR either just because I was feeling like it, because there was a readathon that it was relevant to, and I tracked every single book, including ones from Piles of Possibilities, which are just a massive pile that I don't intend to get every book. So I wasn't expecting to have read 100% of these, and I did way better at knocking out books that I TBR'd somewhere really, really well. So I had a total of 55 books that went on TBRs at some point during months of the year last year. And out of those, I read 44 and I have only 11 unread. So I'm super happy with that. I think that's really, really good. I think only one of those was specifically on a TBR multiple times, and that's going to be a priority to get to for this year. My last goal was to read 12 bestsellers. My library has a dedicated bestsellers shelf, and anything that's tagged for that shelf is not something you can put a hold on. It's not as renewable as the rest of the books. And I tend to think I have a preconception that I was attempting to overcome about many things that are on the bestseller shelf. And I feel like I did that very successfully. So the goal was to go in and browse the bestseller shelf once a month and pick something out. I did lean toward my own taste rather than kind of going for things that are very outside. I didn't pick up any James Patterson, that sort of thing. I didn't pick up any domestic suspense, even though there were an awful lot of options. So the books I picked out were much more quirky. Some things I would have gotten to, maybe not as soon if I hadn't been doing this project, and some things I may never have even noticed, I think. And overall, I was very surprised, and I think proved my own point that I should be looking at more bestsellers, because I overall had a great experience. I only had 2 disappointing books. The rest were phenomenal. I had great reads off of the bestseller shelf. So I need to trust the wider reading consciousness, I think, more than I do, because these hyped books I did actually enjoy a ton. So the books that I read, I had 1 DNF, and that was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. This is a very popular book, but it's not for me. I DNF'd AJ Fikry as well. So unsurprisingly, I went to this hopeful, but it did not improve upon the things I didn't like from AJ Fikry as well. So I'm aware it's a well-loved book. I am fine with you enjoying the book, but it is not for me. I 2-starred The Vaster Wilds by Lauren Groff. I love the prose, but again, it was not for me. I found the characterization and the plotting totally ridiculous and unbelievable or inconsistent with the backstory of the character. So it was not for me. So those were the 2 disappointments. Everything else was great. I had 4 4-stars and 6 5-star reads in the bestsellers, many of which are going to show up on my favorites of the year. So I feel like this project overall was phenomenal. So my 4-star reads from this project were Going Infinite, The Rise and Fall of a Nuke Tycoon by Michael Lewis, I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy, very popular all over BookTube, and everyone seems to love it, so that was no surprise. I don't think I ever would have picked it up if not for this project. The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell, Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. Again, I think I wouldn't have picked this up as soon if it weren't for this project. Into the 5 stars, we have An Immense World by Ed Yong. Definitely one of my favorite nonfiction of the year, and I've read it twice, not once, but twice. Page Boy by Elliot Page was one of my most anticipated reads of the year in nonfiction, and I very much enjoyed. Starling House by Alex E. Harrow, a favorite author that was cemented with this. Taste My Life Through Food by Stanley Tucci. River of the Gods, Genius, Courage, and Betrayal in the Search for the Source of the Nile by Candice Millard. And Other Birds by Sarah Addison Allen. I don't think I would have picked that one up at all, period. I think I would have not even known that book existed if it weren't sitting on the bestseller shelf. And it hasn't even gotten that much buzz, even on BookTube, really, even though it was a Book of the Month Club book. I think that's the only reason it was on the bestseller shelf. So I'm glad that it was, though, because that certainly is one of my favorite books of the year. So, but those were my bestsellers project. It was highly successful. So tick on that one. And I think the last thing to round out the video is just that I had a note to keep an eye on historical fiction and nonfiction. BookTube Prize helped me very much in that I felt like I read a good amount of historical nonfiction last year, and I also picked up a great deal of historical fiction broadly on my own. So I didn't feel that I underread in that area over the year. But that was something that, because I had kind of made that note and kept an eye on it, I incorporated that into my 2024 goals, because I realized that was something I was really joyful and excited about, and I wanted to embrace that joy in my goals for 2024. So having all of this data to look at, having the notes of the things that were priorities from this year, last year, the previous years, has really helped me shape and structure and understand better what I'm excited about, what I'm needing to tackle, what I'm needing to pay attention to in order to best format my reading, best build habits about my reading so that I get the maximum enjoyment out of it. Not that this has to be about efficiency, but when you're losing sight of the things that bring you joy just in order to tick off chores, I think that becomes a problem. And so I'm constantly working on restructuring and bettering and further simplifying my goals so that all of these things that are bringing me joy are happening naturally in my life. And I'm constantly trying to refine that. So I think that's my reflection for the year. Of course, as soon as I finish filming, I will probably remember something that I forgot to say that I was meaning to, but I think that's where we're gonna leave it. So hopefully my reading year in 2024 will be more streamlined and will accomplish some of these goals I failed at. My Read What You Own 2024 is going quite well so far, I would say, even though it's only got a couple books. I'm succeeding. I haven't bought or borrowed any new books. So hopefully I can keep on track and continue following my reading joy in 2024. That is it for me today. Thank you so very much for watching.